So years ago, one of my favorite memories. Years ago, I was a new gardener. Moved to New Mexico and had my garden all lined out, and this soil was perfect in this area where I was for a garden, and planted my tomatoes, and those were the fruit that I was most proud of. And the plants were awesome. I mean, you couldn't believe what these plants looked like, and big and hefty. And the only problem was there was no fruit on them, no tomatoes. They weren't growing a thing, and I at that point didn't really know a whole lot about what was involved in tomato growing, and so I was waiting for some fruit to sprout, and nothing was happening. All of a sudden, we had this hailstorm, and the hailstorm just took my whole, all those plants, just totally messed them up, just damaged them, broke the branches, the vines off, and so I thought, well, that's the end of that. I mean, it just stripped them, and lo and behold, it took a little while, but those plants came back, and they weren't as good looking as they were. They weren't beautiful and lush big plants any longer, but they they put on fruit like I had never ever experienced before, and or since then. I mean, it was just incredible, the number of tomatoes and the quality of those tomatoes. And then I began to talk to these fellows who did this all the time for years and years, and learned that, well, yeah, sometimes the plants go to sleep and they need to be disrupted. And so they recommended that you go out there and shake those plants and um, bring them to life. And so I did that years later for a lady whose plants had gone to sleep, and I took a broom and kind of beat them around and tried to wake them up. And she was so shocked by what I was doing that the next time I came over to see her, she had pulled those plants up because she figured that I had ruined them. She pulled those plants up and planted some new tomato plants. So it was kind of a funny thing how that all worked out. But I learned through that, what you are probably already onto, is that disruption is a way that we learn. We all know that. If you haven't lifted weights for a while, go out and do that, and just see if that disruption of your muscles that have gone to sleep doesn't do a number on you. You're going to be sore, you're going to be stiff, it's going to hurt. You know that it is. I just started walking the mountain again up behind my house, and my knees are hurting, and my calves are aching a little bit because I haven't done that for a while. Disruption, while a very good thing, is a difficult thing, and God does that. God uses that, and we all know that. We just need to be reminded of that. God scattered His people in the great story of the Book of Acts. God scatters His people. I mean, He uses circumstances, but it's apparent that God is in this, and He's at work in it. Um, Philippians, is that great promise, Philippians chapter 1, that He who began a good work in you will complete it. He'll complete that work. Um, as long as you're alive, and as long as God is, your king, and He is, um, He'll be working in your life and growing you. And sometimes disruption is the way He does that. I mean, I think of stories like the children of Israel being disciplined. They'd gone to sleep in their faith, and God wakes them up by uh, carrying them into exile. I think about the stories of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, and David and Jonathan, and Paul and Peter, and so many stories that just come alive when you grasp this. And it's hard because we don't want disruption, um, but God works through that. In Philippians chapter 2, one of the great verses there is that we're not to grumble and complain. Why? if we should grumble and complain, or if we can, and something's going on that we feel like we need to grumble and complain about, why not grumble and complain, right? Well, there Paul says, here's why. Because it is God who is at work in you, both willing and working for his good pleasure. God's working in you. So those disruptive things, COVID's a disruptor, and all the pieces of that just kind of take off from that word, COVID. Um, it's a disruptor to our lives. And yet, if we will let it, it is something through which God can bring growth in our lives. I'm not saying, I'm not hammering on the old thing that, everything in our life is a lesson, always trying to teach us something. I think God gives us a break. I truly do believe that God is not always hammering away on us, walks with us and talks with us, and we have great moments. But there are those times where God is disrupting, and we need disrupting. So here's what I want to say: believing that God is working and willing for his good pleasure in our lives to grow and to bring us to the creation that he wants us to be. He knows he's the creator. Here's a couple things to think about. First of all, don't be really quick. Don't be really quick to buy into the quick fix solutions. We want to get rid of our pain, and we want to get rid of our disruption so quickly. We're taught that. Grab a pill, grab a quick read, that we'll be able to digest it really fast and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things, and the world will be right. Those usually aren't very helpful, and you know that. But we're just going to say some obvious things today. Secondly, don't despair over the difficult. Don't despair over it. Remember, Peter got up and walked out on the water? You remember that? It wasn't the boat that was safe. It was actually out on the water, the stormy, wind-blown sea of Galilee. That's where he was safe with Jesus. And of course, Peter took a few steps, or however many he took, and then he sank. But the Lord was there. So don't despair in the difficult. Difficulty is what often is the thing that helps us and causes us to reach for God so that he can bring us to where he knows that we can be and that we need to be. And then last of all, don't quit before God is done. Okay, that's the title of this, but don't quit before God is done. It's so easy for us to bail just at the moment that God is saying, okay, we're there. We can do something now. You're trusting me. And that's the whole point. It's 2 Corinthians 12 where Paul is, he's about to bail. He's saying, God, you got to get me out of this. You got to take care of this thorn in the flesh. And God says, no, right now is where you're at your best, at your weakest, because at your weakest, you have to rely on my grace. And so don't quit before God is done. Hang in there. Keep your eyes on Jesus. And, the life that he lived before us was one of accepting what God asked him to go through. Anyway, you get the point. And God is with you, willing and working for his good pleasure, which is your good pleasure as well, by the way, if you hear that verse clearly. Hey, God bless you today and have a great weekend, and I will see you next Tuesday.